The effects of Washington's official withdrawal from the landmark U.S.-Russia treaty, which banned certain short and intermediate-range missiles, kicked in very quickly. Just one day after the announcement, the newly appointed Pentagon boss said he wanted American missiles somewhere in this part of the world.
It's fair to say, though, that we would like to deploy capabilities sooner rather than later. I would prefer months. I just don't have the latest state of play on timelines.
Russia realized something was cooking, and on Monday, President Putin had this to say.
If we receive verified information that the US has finished developing and started producing these systems, Russia will be forced to begin its own full-scale development of similar missiles.
In the build-up to this, Moscow kept saying that the collapse of the treaty would be dangerous, that it was all part of a bigger plan by Washington, that the Americans accused the Russian military of violations only to use them as a pretext for their own military expansion. Now that Uncle Sam's hands are untied. There you have it. The U.S. government jumped straight into action, and the Kremlin warning was quick to follow. If you started, we'll have to do it too. Given that NATO is on Russia's doorstep, we'll be obliged to make sure we are protected. That was the gist of what Vladimir Putin was saying. But as we've shown, Washington is beginning with somewhere in between Beijing and Canberra.
I think our efforts to deploy our resources, our defense resources, to create deterrence and stability around the world are something we're always looking at.
There's barely any doubt countering China is what they're after in the first place. And even when U.S. officials were talking about abandoning the INF, they were frank. We don't want our arsenals to be limited by any laws that don't put any restrictions on the Chinese military. The barriers were gone, and so right away, Pompeo and Esper flew over to the region to do the talking. Some in Australia, which already hosts a U.S. Marine base near Darwin, got really worried.
Has the US ever asked to install missiles in Northern Australia?
No.
Would you consider it if they did ask that?
That's not something the government can consider. It's not being asked of us. It's not being considered. It's not being put to us. So, I think I can rule a line under that.
The Prime Minister tried to calm the public down. After all, no one there wants to be dragged into a potential standoff between the world's two mightiest economies. Speaking of business, the new Defense Secretary's background adds extra spice to the story. His reputation as a top lobbyist for one of Uncle Sam's biggest contractors led to a few uncomfortable questions at the confirmation hearing.
Secretary Esper, prior to becoming Army Secretary, you were the top lobbyist for Raytheon. That's a conflict of interest, given that Raytheon does billions of dollars worth of business every year with the Defense Department. When you left as their top lobbyist was at least $1 million in deferred compensation. This smacks of corruption. Plain and simple.
I think this is a good debate.
No, I'm not trying to have a debate.
No, I know, but I'm trying to
know, will you commit not to work for or get paid by any defense contractor for at least 4 years after your government service?
No, Senator, I will not.
He still got the job, and by the looks of it, is on track to securing a fresh bunch of contracts for the military-industrial complex at home.
Political analyst Daniel McAdams told us that the U.S. decision to withdraw from the treaty was over its plans for missile expansion in the Asia-Pacific region.
Well, getting out of the INF treaty was a lot more about China than Russia, even though Secretary Pompeo said it's all Russia's fault that the U.S. is getting out. They've accused Russia for a long time of having intermediate-range missiles, while the U.S. has been developing its own intermediate-range missiles. What it did was it established a kind of a bond of trust that the U.S. had developed with the Soviet Union, which continued as the Soviet Union gave way to Russia, democratic and free Russia. And now that has been stopped, that has been ended. What it means for the U.S. is a new arms race in the Pacific, sending missiles to the Pacific where the Chinese, 80% of their missiles would fall under an INF treaty. This is a great excuse for the U.S. military-industrial complex to find new territory to develop and send out its wares.